This is the Khmer Times News. My name is Paolo Bonini, and these are your headlines. A tycoon involved in a $100 million fraud takes an almighty fall. Two men use a machete to hack a man to death. And kidnappers who violently tortured a man are now to face justice. But firstly, our headline story. His Majesty King Norodom Sihamoni has ordered the termination of the title of Khmer for a Mr. Kim Hong, a businessman accused of being complicit in a multi-million-dollar fraud that is the largest of its kind. The tycoon who has taken this fall from grace stands accused of defrauding an incredible 30,000 families out of over $100 million. And if you follow this news show, you will not be surprised to find out that the fraud yet again was based around investments in land. And this time, tens of thousands of investors have been robbed, causing misery and financial ruin to a vast sway of innocent people. Most of the victims had been lured into the scam, wanting to be part of the modern-day gold rush of investing in land within the kingdom, and that land paying high returns in a very short space of time. And it seemed that Mr. Kim Hong had the answer. He had vast tracts of land that were sure to turn in huge profits. And you, the investor, could buy a slice of this juicy investment pie, one that would return huge profits. But alas, it was not so, as yet again many of the deals were fraudulent, and the money being paid in by new investors only went to older investors to perpetuate the scam. But this scam was on a totally new level, with tens of thousands of people now facing ruin. And with over $100 million involved, it is fair to say it will ruin some families for an entire generation. This, by far, is not a victimless crime, as many investors had in fact been so convinced of the huge profits that could be made, they had borrowed all they could from banks to secure money to pump into the scheme. But alas, they were to find out they had been conned, and now their once secure, carefree futures have been replaced by a bleak landscape of never-ending debt, one that has utterly destroyed their lives. On this week's Crime Desk, a man is hacked to death by two crazed lunatics. Violent kidnappers face the courts at long last. And a sweeping raid in the capital nets 200 kilos of illegal drugs. A large manhunt that involved not just the police but also armed gendarmerie has at last come to an end. After covering numerous provinces, the two criminals being hunted were two young men who had used a machete to hack another man to death and to leave his friend severely wounded. The Ratanakiri Provincial Gendarmerie arrested the two suspects on National Road 8 in Bandung City. The man they had so brutally hacked to death was just 20 years old, and his 18-year-old friend, also caught in this murderous assault, was exceedingly lucky to still be alive at the end of it, as he was also savagely assaulted by these two brutal men. Now, you can only imagine the horror as these two men repeatedly bore down on them, striking over and over again with a blade that was over 60 centimeters long. It must have been truly petrifying, the screams and the blood all around as these two savages went about their murderous work. The 18-year-old that survived told his story of how he was defenseless against such a barbaric attack, and it was only due to luck that he survived. He was left next to his dying friend, but he was able to summon help and was soon rushed to hospital. The manhunt was carried out by specialized forces and went on for 6 full days. The two suspects were arrested, and it turned out that both of them were just 19 years of age. They confessed to their crime, and now both suspects await their day in court. Now a follow-up on a story that shocked so many, and that was the brazen kidnapping of a man in a car park in Phnom Penh some months ago. A kidnapping that unsurprisingly was caught on security cameras. Well, a court is now to prosecute 4 Chinese men for the violent kidnapping within the capital. A kidnapping that was as brutal as it was brazen. Lieutenant Colonel Sao said that 12 Chinese suspects kidnapped 2 fellow countrymen when they left a club in Phnom Penh. The kidnapping group pushed the victims into a car parked in front of the club and took them to a rental villa. It was soon after the terror began. After being confined, the 2 victims were told that they would need to raise $60,000 for their release and ordered the hostages to contact their families and friends to pay this ransom. It was then the terrifying violence began. The 2 victims were savagely beaten over and over and forced into a state of abject terror and told to contact those relatives. They did so, pleading desperately for help to end their suffering. But it was those very calls that helped bring aid to the victims, as members of the victim's family alerted the police, and the police launched a raid and arrested the suspects. The lieutenant colonel in charge of the case said, "Police are now seeking another 9 suspects who are wanted in connection with this kidnapping case." Now then, is at this point we need to do some maths. We have 12 men involved in a kidnapping that's had a payout of $60,000. That, of course, means each man would have benefited by only $5,000. $5,000 for a crime that carries a lengthy prison sentence of many years in jail? Is it in fact not very clear that this is an indicator of how violent and how dangerous some of these men are, and how willing they are to commit these violent crimes, all for such little amounts of money? Now, we have not had one of these for quite a while. It is an epic drug bust. This time, a colossal 200 kilos. A gang has been remanded in custody after 200 kilos of drugs was discovered in Phnom Penh. The anti-drug department raided 4 locations in a sweeping bust that saw law enforcement officials spread out across the capital for a very coordinated strike against a highly organized gang of drug smugglers. They hit a water station, a condominium, and 2 private houses simultaneously to take out this gang, with the element of surprise very much on their side. During the raid, specialized forces arrested 6 Cambodian nationals. There was 3 men and 3 women. The police seized a vast amount of drugs, and they came in all flavours, including 158 kilos of methamphetamine, 22 kilos of ketamine, and 7 kilos of heroin. Police also seized 3 cars and $300,000 in cash. It was not just doors being kicked in though, for as the suspects were being arrested, a financial team immediately froze 23 bank accounts. The police raids caught the gang completely off guard and paralysed their network. All perpetrators now await their day in court. This week we do have a good news story to end the show, which makes a pleasant change. And it is all about something most of my viewers will never experience, and that is abject poverty. It has been announced that Cambodia has lifted 2.8 million people out of poverty in just the past 7 years. In a remarkable achievement, over 50% of the country's total poor have been lifted from poverty, according to the latest UNDP country programme data. In the past 7 years, people living in poverty dropped from 5.6 million to 2.8 million. Now, Cambodia's total population is estimated at 16.9 million, so at current 16.5% of the total population still live in that poverty bracket. So there is still much work to do, but the numbers related this week are indeed very promising. Rapid economic growth, averaging at over 7% between 1998 and 2019, helped the country to reduce the poverty rate drastically. However, the report added that income inequality is high in the country, with a big gap between rural and urban populations. But what is the line? When does one slip below the poverty line? Well, the World Bank defines poverty as being below 11,000 riel per day. That's about $2.50 per day to survive on. And that number is really sobering. Just think about it. That has to cover everything. Your food, your clothing, your medical expenses, everything. And if you have children, then you have to pay for them as well. So, next time you think you are having a bad day, just remember that number, $2.50, and think how very, very difficult it is for so many others. It's time to have a look ahead and see what the weather has in store for us next week. Okay, so here we go with the weather. My goodness, hasn't there been a dramatic change? What was is not what is. Where we just had a blanket of scorching sunshine, now we have a torrent of rain. We can expect humidity to be at 90%, and temperatures surprisingly still getting as high as 37 degrees. This has been the Khmer Times News. Please do subscribe and comment and stay up to date with all the breaking news by following us on both Facebook and Telegram. This has been Paolo Bonini, and that was the week that was. I'll see you next weekend for your weekly roundup.